So let's get started. It is my honor to introduce the moderator of this webinar, Professor Michael Mitchelson. Professor Mitchelson is the clinical professor and the director of externship programs at Oklahoma City University's School of Law. Before joining the law faculty, Professor Mitchelson worked for the Ford Foundation, the Southern Cooperative Development Fund, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, a private law firm, was counsel to the town of Langston, Oklahoma, and the state of Oklahoma as an administrative law judge. Professor Mitchelson received his BA from Williams College, his JD from Columbia University, and his MPA from Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. He directs the externship programs at OCU Law, including the Government Practice Externship, Judicial Externship, and Litigation Practice Externship. Michael?
Thank you very much, Josh, and welcome everyone to our webinar. We'll first start with the presentation from the staff at the FAA. We actually have two attorneys from the FAA who are participating, but the presenter today is going to be Dean Griffith. Dean is the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Regulatory Policy and Outreach, team leader for the FAA Office of Chief Counsel. In that role, he advises the FAA's UAS Integration Office and other lines of business on rulemaking, exemptions, policy development, and other matters. Prior to law school, he worked for several years in politics and government relations. Dean is a 2006 graduate of the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law. Dean, are you ready to proceed?
I am, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Dean Griffith. I'm with the FAA Office of Chief Counsel. I have my colleague Charles Raley here with me. We serve as the two UAS team leads in this area. I focus on the regulatory side, and Charles focuses on the enforcement side. So I think we should be covered with getting some good information about how people are operating UAS today, some recent developments, where we're going, and then be able to answer any questions you have. So everything we do at the FAA, we view through the lens of safety, and that's really the most important thing to us. It's the reason we were formed as an agency to aviation safety. We are concerned about the safety of people on the ground as well as the users of the airspace. We are working to integrate unmanned aircraft into the National Airspace System in an incremental way using a risk-based approach so that we are putting in risk mitigations that make sense for the kinds of operations that are occurring. And that's not only for UAS, but it's kind of across the agency's work. The administrator has really challenged us to use risk-based decision-making as a key tool in all of our regulatory and oversight activities. And so while and I think kind of what the long-term goal for unmanned aircraft is that it's just another kind of operation in the airspace. It might be instrument flight rules, it might be under the control of air traffic control, it might be within line of sight operations, but at the end of the day, it's going to be we're going to move from where we started with really only public aircraft operations and kind of case by case commercial authorizations, leading up to the Part 107 rule, from those very kind of baby steps through authorization of commercial and other non-hobby kind of operations, and then ultimately looking at aircraft certification potentially, looking at larger aircraft, and at the end of the day is having them be another kind of operation, not really distinct from existing operations in the NAS. And so what are unmanned aircraft? Obviously, FAA is concerned about aviation safety, and so why are we concerned about this? Why are we involved? Congress in 2012 in the FAA Modernization Reform Act, PL 112-95. All the documents I'm going to reference are available on our website, faa.gov/UAS, for reference. Congress defined in that act, among other things, an unmanned aircraft as an aircraft. That includes models. It includes any aircraft that's not operated by somebody, or is not able to be operated by somebody in the aircraft. And the system, as a matter of the terminology, the system is all the components and everything that goes along with it. The aircraft is the thing that's flying around. And then that definition of aircraft feeds into our overall jurisdiction, promote safe flight of civil aircraft and air commerce, and then to prescribe air traffic regulations. So again, FAA is very broad safety authority. Kind of an interesting thing for me as an attorney working in this area is that for the first 6 years or so of working here at the agency, our authority is generally so broad and well defined. It's broad enough that I really hadn't been in the statutes that much. Everything we'd done was in regulations, and this was in the manned context, generally in business aviation, helicopters, and the like. Our regulations were so solidly based in our safety authority, didn't really have to get into the statutes that much. Here, we're defining, kind of figuring out where the authority lies, where the statutes lie, that sort of thing. So it's kind of particularly interesting for me working in this space. So that's generally U.S. aircraft, and they fall within our jurisdiction. So as we talked about a little bit before, the Small UAS Rule Part 107 was just issued last month. It takes effect on August 29th. And this is really the first, really opened the door to widespread commercial operations of unmanned aircraft systems in the NAS. And it's looking at small UAS, which are under 55 pounds. And again, we took a risk-based approach. One of the key components of this rule is that it does not require an airworthiness certificate, which is generally how the FAA understands an aircraft is safe to be operated in the airspace, is that it has an airworthiness certificate assigned to it, and we have a whole process for obtaining it, which can be long and costly. So what we did, instead of requiring an airworthiness certificate, recognizing that it may not make sense for a lot of these small UAS, is to mitigate the risk associated with not having that airworthiness certificate. So that's why we looked at the criteria we did. Within line of sight operations, I'll bounce back to that. Visual line of sight only, daylight operations, not operating over people, all the ones you can see here on this slide. And so that's really our rationale going into this. We've, at least with the proposal and since finalizing this rule, we've received some positive feedback. We did not try to overreach in this area. I think people are recognizing that it's a pretty kind of common sense rule. So those are the operating requirements. There are requirements on becoming a pilot, and so this is another distinction between existing operations or existing pilot certificates and this remote pilot operator certificate. There's no hourly flight requirement that goes along with it. There are, however, some requirements: 16 years old, read, write, speak English, and that you have to pass the knowledge test at a knowledge testing center. So basically, it's a similar experience that a pilot would have in obtaining a Part 61 certificate if they were to go and become a private pilot or commercial pilot. They would also go to a knowledge testing center and take an examination. They're looking at areas like weather, charts, those kind of basic aviation components. And the idea is that, to have some education, have some knowledge about the environment you're operating in, have some knowledge about, yes, you are, as a UAS pilot, are interacting with other aircraft and the aviation system as a whole, so you should have a basic understanding about what that entails. This piece about the supervised operation without a certificate, what that really enables is for UAS drone training programs where a certificated pilot can teach a student who does not have a certificate how to fly, provided they're providing supervision over that operation. And a key component here, which I'll talk a little bit later, is government entities can choose. 107 is really being billed as the commercial UAS rule, but really it's open to any entity that wants to fly under its provisions. So, for example, a governmental entity could fly under Part 107 if they follow its provisions. Even somebody who flies for recreation, someone who would be traditionally a modeler who would fly using the separate Section 336 of the law, using those provisions, using those guidelines, they could fly under Part 107 too, if it suits them. So it's really open to anybody, but primarily, we think it's going to open up the operations in the commercial sector. So the other ways that people are currently operating UAS, and this is kind of The bridge to 107 is Section 333, and all these section numbers are again referring back to the Public Law 11295, which is really the foundational piece for our UAS direction. We received some additional directives from Congress last week in our 2016 reauthorization, so there are some more additional measures we'll need to take kind of to build upon what was in the 2012 law, but the 2012 law I think really is the kind of set the baseline for us and what we're doing here. Section 333 in the 2012 law was pretty unique in that it allowed the FAA to not require airworthiness certificates for certain operations, and that's one of the airworthiness certificate is one of the statutory requirements to operate an aircraft. Registration and pilot certificates are the other two. But it basically told the agency, look, in an effort to jumpstart some commercial operations, you can allow flights to occur without airworthiness certificate. We coupled that with our existing exemption authority to allow people to exempt people from our rules. If somebody can petition the agency and would tell us, I don't necessarily want to comply with these couple of rules, here's why, and here's how I'm still going to operate safely, the agency would evaluate that and either grant or deny that request in essentially a kind of a quasi-regulatory process. So we combined the Section 333 and then our Part 11 exemption process to jumpstart commercial operations, and there were, I think, granted about 6,000 of those to date. We had a significant backlog. I mean, that generated a lot of interest. I think we still have about 6,000 or 7,000 pending before the agency. We expect that over 90% of those could operate under Part 107 under the new rules without an exemption. And that's basically what we've indicated to people who have applied but are waiting for an answer from the agency, that if you can operate under 107, we expect you to. If you'll be able to operate under Part 107 with a waiver, a number of the provisions of Part 107 are waivable, beyond line of sight, daytime operations, and several others, that we'll consider your petition to be, you're asking for a waiver from the agency. And there will still be some that need an exemption anyway, because they wouldn't be able to fit into the rule. So for those folks, that's how we're treating people who have applied. But if a company already holds a 333 exemption, they'll be able to continue to operate under that exemption until it expires. They can elect to operate under Part 107 as well. But we'd advise that they be very clear about what they're operating under and maybe have some sort of documentation about what they're choosing in case it comes into question. Governmental entities are still able to operate as public aircraft operators. The public aircraft statute in Title 49 basically says that if you're a governmental entity and you're performing a governmental function, that you can operate a UAS, and the advantage of that is you're not subject to all the same rules as non-governmental entity or non-governmental function operations. So there's a little bit more flexibility there. You still need to have a certificate of waiver or authorization from the agency, which basically waives rules related to being able to see and avoid other aircraft. And so there are other limitations as well. So there's a little bit another administrative hurdle there. You're not able to get compensation. There are some advantages, such as those operations don't have to have a certificated aircraft or certificated pilot. But again, it's pretty limited in terms of what you can do. But people will still be able to operate using that statute as well. And so where we're going from here, again, the Part 107 is the first kind of major step in our incremental approach. We're looking at operations over people rule. The FAA conducted their chartered aviation rulemaking committee, basically a stakeholder committee, to look at these issues, and they came back with several recommendations related to if people could operate under the provisions of Part 107, the operating rules, that they'd be able to fly over people in certain circumstances. And they recommended a set of graduated requirements based on the potential kind of damage an aircraft would cause if it impacted somebody or something. So we're currently evaluating that, and we'll be conducting rulemaking in that area. The administrator recently announced chartering the Drone Advisory Committee, which is a stakeholder group that will advise the agency on where we should be placing our efforts with the UAS and kind of keeping us abreast as well on a lot of the technological changes and what's happening in the industry, so that we're informed as well. The chairman of the CEO of Intel, Peter Kazanich, will be the chairman of that committee. So it's a fairly high-level committee. but it also demonstrates the agency's commitment to collaboration in this area, and the fact that, as the pace of technology exceeds the pace of rulemaking. And so, this will, I think, keep us focused on common sense rulemaking approaches, common sense policy that, be flexible enough to address those changes, but still ensuring that we have a safe airspace system and that we're ensuring that people on the ground are safe as well. We're conducting a number of research activities. We have a Pathfinder program currently active that's looking at beyond line of sight operations with the BNSF Railway. They're doing rail inspection of their rail line, operating beyond line of sight of their operators. We have CNN looking at operations over people and urban operations. And then kind of in the middle, we have a group called Precision Hawk, who's looking at what we've termed extended visual line of sight, in which the pilot can see, may not be able to see the aircraft itself, but can see the airspace in which it's operating. So if there's another aircraft or something else comes into the space where that aircraft, where their UAS is, they'll be able to take evasive action. So we're looking at things like how, what they can see, what they can't see, what makes sense. We also have a center of excellence that we've recently stood up, who's doing a lot of research in this area, and the UAS test sites are also active in their program. And that was recently extended by Congress as well. And that wraps up my formal presentation. Charles and my contact information are there on this slide. And with that, I'll turn over to Mike.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dean. Now we're going to go on ahead and get to our next presenter, Martin J. Howell. Martin serves as an attorney in the DeBee Gilchrist firm here in Oklahoma City, in the firm's aviation group. His practice includes transactional matters involving aircraft title, registration, purchase, sale, finance, and leasing under the purview of the Federal Transportation Code, Federal Aviation Administration regulations, and the Cape Town Convention. Prior to joining DeBee Gilchrist, Mr. Howell worked for a Fortune 500 oil and gas company focused on land matters related to hydrocarbon exploration and production. Martin is a member of the Oklahoma Bar Association, and importantly for this discussion is a FAA certified private pilot. He got his Juris Doctorate from the University of Oklahoma College of Law. He received his business degree from the University of Oklahoma Michael F. Price College of Law with an emphasis in finance, and he graduated with distinction. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Martin. Martin, if you will.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Martin Hal, and I'm with DeBee Gilchrist, and we are an FAA regulatory firm, and we specialize in aircraft title registration and regulatory issues. So while Dean focused on the regulatory framework of small unmanned aircraft system operations, I'm going to focus more on the real-world application and real-world demands based on what I've seen from my clients and from the aviation community. So, as Dean mentioned, there are several types of unmanned aircraft operations. There's model or hobby operations, and then there's non-model or non-hobby operations, and then there's civil operations, and there's public operations. And Dean went over some of those, but I'm going to just take a minute to kind of clarify what I'll be talking about here. And I think the best way to do that is probably to define what I'm not talking about. So I'm not talking about model aircraft operations. So those are operations for hobby or recreational use, so not for commercial use, that are operated in accordance with community-based safety standards as opposed to FAA regulations, and they're operations of aircraft weighing 55 pounds or less. So that would be this guy here in the picture over here, flying his model drone with his kids, just out for fun or hobby purposes. So not talking about that. We're also not talking about public aircraft operations. That's operations by the military or police or fire departments. So we're talking about civil operations, so not this Predator drone here. So definitely not that. So we are not talking about these. We're talking about civil non-model operations, which for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to refer to as commercial small unmanned aircraft system operations, or commercial SUAS operations. And I'll primarily be looking at forward-looking towards the proposed Part 107 regulations that Dean discussed, but there will be some references back to the 333 exemption process that was the predecessor to the proposed Part 107, which will be coming to effect at the end of August. So, as far as demand and real-world application of commercial SUAS operations are concerned, this right here is a list of basically the most popular applications. So I pulled most of this from what I've seen from clients, what they're asking for, from what I've seen in the aviation community, especially through what was being requested in the 333 exemption process. But so while many of these were applications that were requested in the 333 process, they're also all applications that are going to be allowed under Part 107. So the largest and most prevalent category that we're seeing demand in is this aerial data collection. And so that's exactly what you'd think it'd be. That's your aerial photography, your aerial geography surveying, which can include surveying property lines or mapping, cartography. But then there's also inspections is a huge one. Crops, power lines, pipelines, utility companies are using this stuff. Farmers are using this stuff. Engineers to survey bridges. Also wildlife observation, surveillance, and atmospheric measurements. All kind of fall under the umbrella of the aerial data collection. So, and then another large category of demand is the closed set filming. These are news, movies, and television producers, and so they're strapping very high power cameras to these drones and using them to film their TV shows and their movies, and they're able to get really unique shots that they probably couldn't get otherwise, or as you'll see later in my presentation, the alternatives for getting those kind of shots would be really expensive and or dangerous. So we're seeing a lot of closed set filming application for these commercial SUAS operations, and then also to a lesser extent search and rescue, and that kind of sometimes can straddle the line of the public versus civil application, but you do see it in the civil side. And finally, UAS technology testing and development, and those are your drone manufacturers, your drone accessory manufacturers, and your drone component manufacturers. So we're seeing a majority of the current demand is in these areas right here. However, there are quite a few operations that are in demand that are not allowed under Part 107. And as Dean mentioned, some of these can be waived under the provisions set forth in Part 107, but without that waiver, they are not allowed. And by far the most in demand of these banned operations is beyond visual line of sight operations. So, as Dean mentioned, you cannot fly or unmanned aircraft beyond your visual line of sight in Part 107. Well, if you're going to do, pipeline, crop, power line inspection, as you mentioned with BNSF Railroad, you're going to want to probably fly beyond your line of sight. Otherwise, a huge portion of the advantage that you're gaining by using these unmanned aircraft is gone. So this long-range aerial data collection beyond visual line of sight is very much in demand, but we'll probably see quite a bit of it still because of the waiver process that's being built in. So it's definitely not out of the question. It's just not allowed immediately under Part 107. Another type of operation that's in demand that's not currently allowed under Part 107 is a package delivery, drone package delivery, and this has been a really popular one. It's been in the news, and everybody's seen that Google and Amazon, and in some cases I think Walmart, are wanting to deliver their products via drone, and it's made a lot of headlines. And so two of the big ones here are Google. This is Google Wing here on the left. This is their project. And that would be a drone that would fly over and lower a package down to you on a string, and it would deliver something you had ordered through Google. And on the right here we've got, this is Amazon Prime Air's prototype of drone, and they're talking about maybe being able to deliver your Amazon package in hours or maybe even minutes of ordering it. So there's a lot of demand for this, and people have been asking for it. And unfortunately, under 107, it's not allowed. Not specifically barred, but it would tail beyond visual line of sight, most likely, unless you're somehow within line of sight of the warehouse where these products are coming from. And it's probably going to run into some situations where you're going to cross the 55-pound SUAS threshold. So, and unfortunately, Part 107 has said that you specifically cannot waive this. It says that there is no waiver for beyond visual line of sight carriage of property of another by aircraft for compensation. So as of right now, it's not allowed. But I think, as Dean mentioned, you know, they recognize a lot, the FAAs recognize a lot of the demand here, and they're working very, very hard towards safely integrating these operations into the national airspace system. So, and they're doing a great job. So I think all drone enthusiasts and commercial operators are very happy so far with Part 107. So some other operations that aren't currently allowed under 107 are, there we go, night operations and operations over people. So night operations, you know, if you need to do some of your aerial data collection at night, wildlife observation at night, you can't do it, but fortunately it is waivable under Part 107, so definitely still a possibility. And then also, as Dean mentioned, operations over people are not allowed. You have to only operate over people that are involved in the operation, or if they're under some kind of protection like a car or a house or something. And that can limit some of the operations that people are wanting to do in Part 107, but fortunately it can also be waived. So, and I think that sounds like the FAA is working very hard on extending that to the point where they feel that it's safe, but also meets the needs of the commercial market. So those are both operations that you are allowed to do with a waiver. So it's something that will be able to be done. So now that we've kind of looked at some current operations and some hopeful future operations, we're going to shift gears a little bit and look at the demand. While the demand, drones have really come onto the scene recently and been very popular, and we're kind of asking ourselves, why all of a sudden is there's such demand? And we're going to look at it from the standpoint of aerial data collection, because that's the biggest category and the most popular demand. And so the first reason for this high demand is alternatives. So if you want to collect aerial data, there are other ways. You can get a helicopter, an airplane, or ground-based equipment, but they all have serious drawbacks when compared to unmanned aircraft operations performing this data collection. So helicopters, for example, cost to get the same kind of aerial data collection, you'd probably have to spend between $200 to $500 an hour to rent one, plus fuel. For that amount, as you'll see in my next slide, you could buy your own high-quality drone that is very capable of aerial data collection. You could get an airplane. They're a little bit cheaper. They're about $100 to $300 an hour, but they can't hover. They also can't get as low to the ground as a helicopter or a drone, and they're definitely not as safe if you're getting down that low. Last, you've got ground-based equipment, and this would work. This is pretty safe and it's pretty cheap, but it's very limited. You're not going to be able to get real high. It has to be transported on something. So there's just the alternatives for drones when it comes to aerial data collection are just, they leave something to be desired. So that's really driven up demand for unmanned aircraft. Also, emerging market. Unmanned aircraft are a huge emerging market. The technology has really come about rapidly, and it's become affordable and available to just about everybody, and it's this cheap and widely available technology has just created its own uses. People are saying, hey, this technology is available, it's affordable, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to use it to replace this or that, or for this new venture. And so this is an example. This is a DJI Phantom that I found on Amazon last month for under $500, and this thing has a HD camera, gimbal, 3-axis gimbal, GPS stabilization and guidance, and a video downlink. I mean, this is a turnkey aerial data collection, small unmanned aircraft system right here, just for under $500. So that's some very incredible technology at a really low price. So that's really allowed people to just create a market for this stuff. And just to give you an example, I saw last week the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service used a small unmanned aircraft to shoot vaccine-laced M&Ms at black-footed ferrets in the northern United States to help combat a deadly plague. And they said that these drones can do this cheaper and they can do it faster and more efficiently than people. So let's use them. So there's an example right there, just created a use for itself. Finally, cool factor. Drones are cool right now, high tech. Everybody wants to have them and find a way to integrate them, and that's just driven up demand for them. And so this graph right here you'll see is a graph of the patents filed on drone technology over the last 20-something years. And as you can see, it's just skyrocketed in the last couple of years, just taken off. So, okay, so now that we've looked at current operations and why the demand, we're going to shift our focus and look to the future and kind of look at some of the cool, life-changing, and in some cases, life-saving UAS technology that's on the horizon. So the first one here on the left, you're going to see this is Facebook's Aquila. This is a 141-foot wingspan, 900-pound unmanned aircraft. So this is not a small unmanned aircraft. It's capable of 90 days of continuous operation. It uses precision lasers to beam internet to rural communities. So this is potentially a life-changing UAS for people without internet. And in today's world, internet is critical. You have to have it. The next to it here, we've got the Swarm. And so this isn't exactly a specific technology, but more of an idea. And it's the idea that UAS can work in a network, in a rapidly deployable network to create communication systems, data transmission systems. And so this could be incredibly helpful in natural disasters or like a terrorist attack. You could deploy this Swarm and it could immediately set up a data collection system, and it would allow first responders to have the information that they need to quickly get aid to those with the greatest need. So this could really change the game for a lot of things, because often those first few hours of a disaster are chaotic and normally the most important for people affected by it, but you can normally make the greatest difference. And so the Swarm technology could really improve that greatly. So some other technology that could be on the forefront here is the ambulance drone. And this is a cool idea. So the ground-based ambulance average response time is 8 to 12 minutes. And based on some research that this ambulance drone advocates have done, they're saying that's too long. Those first few minutes after an emergency are often most critical and can really prove to be the difference in life or death. And so they've kind of pitched the idea that these ambulance drones could be placed around a city, and if you call 911 while the ambulance is on its way, one of these drones in kind of a network could launch and come to you with just some basic critical first aid equipment, maybe a defibrillator or a tourniquet, or some kind of something to stop beating, and it would allow you to administer this critical first aid to someone with direction given through the drone, whether to through an automated system or it's speaking to a paramedic or some kind of medical professional. And you could be the first responder in a matter of just moments rather than 8 to 12 minutes. And they're saying that could really make a big difference to a lot of people in a life or death situation. And lastly, we've got personal transportation. We're kind of even blurring the lines even more here. This is the EHang 184, and this is an all-electric unmanned aircraft. So you would get in it, tell it where you want to go, and then the EHang system would basically fly it to that location, you in it. So from my understanding, I don't believe that you pilot this or even have the ability to. It flies you somewhere. So you're the cargo, and this thing can fly it can carry a 220-pound payload, can fly 62 miles an hour, can fly to a maximum altitude of 1,500 feet and for up to 23 minutes. So this is like a legitimate transportation option, and it's the first of its kind, so it can only go up from there. And this is just some technology that really could make a big difference and really change the way that we see and interact with the world, and it's all based on unmanned aircraft technology. So there really is some exciting stuff out there. We've come a long ways, and Part 107 is really a huge step forward, and it's going to allow for some incredible commercial drone operations to come out. And there's even more on the horizon, and as Dean mentioned, the FAA sees that and they're working towards it, and I just think it's a really exciting time to be in this realm, whether you're a drone operator or an entrepreneur, or you run a a photography business and you want to incorporate it, or you're a lawyer and you work in the field, it's just really exciting stuff because of how quickly it's evolving and how fast the technology is developing. Stuff changes on a day-to-day basis, so it's really exciting. So with that, I'll put my contact information up here in case anybody wants to contact me about anything or discuss anything. Feel free. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michael now, and I think that he's going to address any questions that may have come in. So I appreciate everybody tuning in today and see what questions you have.
Thank you very much, Martin. And as Martin said, now's the time for questions. So hopefully we have some, and if you have some that you want to submit, you can go ahead and submit them through the Build a Webinar. So Josh, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. First question, does the FAA have any help or guidance on its website with regard to the knowledge test?
Yeah, this is Dean. There is an advisory circular that published with the final rule, and that lays out a lot of the information about the knowledge test for existing pilots who part of the Part 107 rule. They'll be able to get the certificate by taking an online training course. There's information about that as well. And actually, a lot of the information about that will actually pertain to both the online training course and the knowledge test that people who aren't currently pilots will have to take. All that's available at our website, www.faa.gov/UAS.
Next question, do you have to complete any paperwork under Section 107?
The paperwork that will be required will be to obtain the pilot certificate. There will be some information that will be submitted there. The rule does not require obtaining a COA or any specific authorization from the agency to fly. If you do want to get a waiver, though, for one of the waivable provisions, would have to apply for a waiver using a process that we're going to set up. There's also a registration component for operating a UAS by either 107 or as a modeler as well, and that requires you can actually do that online if it's below 55 pounds. So there is a submission there that you'd have to complete, and that takes about 6 minutes to do.
Next question, the operator rule of daylight or civil twilight only would appear to preclude using UAS in an evening entertainment event such as the Super Bowl. Is this correct?
I think, and maybe Martin, you can answer this as well, but you know, we've seen, at least within the 333 exemption context, people wanting to use, you know, an example is a company that wanted to do nighttime operations of construction sites because that's when the site's not busy for work, so they can, you know, they have more leeway to look around, and there's also some advantages to different cameras and different technology they can use to, you know, to evaluate whatever they're looking at night. So I think there's probably more, and I think we'll see a number of waiver requests in that area. So that, but yeah, certainly, you know, if you want to do, you know, a light show or something along those lines, the nighttime is probably the best time to do it.
All right, next question. Can local community law enforcement in fact intervene when they have reported unauthorized UAVs, UAS activities in accordance with Rule 107?
This is Charles. No, the local law enforcement is not authorized to enforce federal regulatory law. However, they do have laws available to them. There's local and state motor vehicle laws that may be applicable. There are reckless endangerment laws that may be applicable. So although they can't point to a provision in 107 as the basis for a Terry stop or anything like that, they do have other authorities that will allow them to intervene in certain unsafe or unauthorized operations. And the FAA works closely with local law enforcement in creating partnerships in order to gather information about those unsafe and unauthorized operations so that there is such an operation, the FAA can take action as necessary.
Next question. Has the FAA begun inquiring into any proposed regulations that will allow for Google, Amazon package delivery? If not, is there a time frame for when such inquiry may begin?
Well, we're certainly involved in a number of technological components to delivery that are kind of being developed, particularly technology around detect and avoid, where the unmanned aircraft will be able to see other users of the airspace and other buildings and such and be able to avoid them, kind of ensuring fidelity of command and control systems and the like. We're involved in research and standards development with RTCA, which is a standard setting body. There's a lot of aviation work. We're doing research in an area called, we're collaborating on research that NASA's conducting on a concept called Unmanned Traffic Management, UTM, which would basically be a proposal from Google, I believe, where they would look at kind of stratifying low-level airspace and having certain requirements to operate in various levels to facilitate delivery. So we are looking at a number of areas on this. Certainly we understand there's a lot of interest in it, and we'll proceed as we feel is appropriate and as our partners and stakeholders believe is appropriate as well. So we'll consider all that.
Next question. What are the set of regs for their initials here, BVLOS, due to be published by the FAA?
That's beyond visual line of sight. So that's kind of a next key step, particularly when you're looking at large survey operations, whether it be agriculture or railroads, pipelines, delivery. So that's kind of the next step. The current Part 107 rule is limited to within line of sight unless you specifically get a waiver. So widespread use of BVLOS is something the agency is looking at, and we know is a priority and really is going to be. We've been hearing from the stakeholder community is kind of the key next step in really widespread and being able to benefit from the economies of scale for UAS operations.
Where are some places to earn a UAS pilot's license? Community colleges, private trainers?
Yeah, so the place you'd actually obtain it and take the tests, they're called knowledge testing centers. There are several hundred of them around the country, so that's where a person would physically go to get the certificate. I imagine that schools will be popping up and training programs will be popping up on the test itself, for preparing people for the test. The FAA doesn't regulate those, and the information that we're putting out is in the advisory circular and our website. But I think that would be the place I'd start. But I'm sure there'll be folks offering those courses, but we don't have any kind of say as to their quality or kind of the standards that they follow.
Last question from our audience. Who is working on creating standard technologies for detect and avoid of UAS and manned aircraft?
Well, the RTCA is one place that's working on that. They're working on standards. I'd imagine that there are, I think that's kind of one thing we saw when we were working on the Part 107 rule is that there's a fair amount of technology that would potentially work in this realm that's currently being used by manned aircraft. An example is ADSB, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, that gives you the ability for people to see you in the airspace and you have the ability to see where they are. So something along those lines might be a possible solution, but that it's not really miniaturized sufficiently in a way that is really adaptable for small UAS. So I'd imagine there are people working on that solution. And RTCA is working on standards as well. And I think this, as a note, part of our goal as an agency in looking at the risk-based decision-making is also implementing performance-based rules so that we do set standards, that they are ones that we're not telling people how to achieve the standard, but or specifically, here's how you must achieve the standard, saying here's a standard, you can bring to us different ways to achieve it. So again, that's an example of not stifling the technology, of kind of making sure that we can maintain a base level of safety, with allowing people to be creative and find new solutions.
Michael, that's the last of our questions.
All right, thank you, Josh. And before we sign off, I would like to thank CDFA, everyone who helped put this on. I wonder, do our panelists have any closing remarks they would like to make? Anyone?
This is Martin. No, I don't really have anything to say. I just want to thank Dean and Charles for sharing their wisdom and insight on this. I learned a lot myself, actually, so I think this is an exciting time to be in this industry.
Dean and Charles, anything you want to add?
No, thanks. Just thank you for the opportunity to participate today.
All right. Well, I thank everyone for participating. Hopefully this has been very informative. This is a very exciting field, great time to be involved in it, and it's been a pleasure to participate in this. And with that, we'll wish everyone a good afternoon. Thank you very much.